The first time you see her, it doesn't look real. A hospital monitor pulses in the corner of a small desert clinic. Oxygen hisses in a steady line, and an older woman lies very still beneath a thin blanket. Then the back door alarm gives a tired little chime, and a bobcat steps into the hallway, carrying a kitten in her mouth. She shouldn't be here, not in this bright, sterile building at the edge of the Arizona scrub. Not padding down linoleum like she owns it. Her paws are muddy, her coat roughened by 3 hard days of weather. But her walk is calm, purposeful. She passes the nurses, the volunteers, the startled vet with the clipboard, as if they're just sagebrush on either side of a trail. At first, everyone thinks the same thing. She must be begging for help. They've seen heartwarming stories online. A dog that dragged itself to a clinic after being hit by a car. A cat that showed up at a stranger's porch with a broken leg. Maybe, people think, this wild bobcat has come in out of desperation to save the tiny life dangling from her jaws. But that isn't what's happening here. The clinic sits right up against High Mesa Wildlife Refuge, a modest cluster of buildings and pens where injured hawks and foxes and the occasional bobcat live out second chances. In the far room, next to the window that looks toward the refuge, lies Mara Ellison, founder, rehabber, 74 years old, lungs fighting for every inch of air. The staff has known this moment was coming. The oxygen tank, once for emergencies out in the field, became her tether months ago. The doctor has used the word hospice. The monitors are here mostly so they know when to turn them off. Gloria Martinez, the respiratory nurse, stands at the door with a hand on the frame. She has seen a lot of last hours in her career. Rooms full of family, and rooms where no one came. She knows the usual sounds, the usual fade. This is not usual. The bobcat, Sable, reaches the threshold of Mara's room. For a second, she pauses, just one breath's worth of hesitation. Her shoulders rise and fall. In the hallway, 2 volunteers instinctively lean back as if a wave is coming. The vet whispers, "We should get the pole, just in case." Gloria studies Sable's eyes, the way you might study a stranger's face in a waiting room. There's no wild, glassy panic there, just something deep, steady, almost soulful. The kind of focus you see when a person has made a hard choice and is carrying it all the way to the end. Sable steps forward. She does not jump on the machines. She does not lash out. She goes to the foot of the bed, lifts her head, and places the kitten on Mara's blanket with a care that would put many humans to shame. Tiny claws spread against the cotton. The kitten lets out a thin, complaining squeak and wriggles closer to the warmth in front of it. Mara doesn't move. Not yet. Sable turns, trots back down the hall. Someone breathes. She's leaving. Another voice, higher, says, "She knew to come here. She knew this was where we help." 30 seconds later, Sable is back with a second kitten, then a third. Each time she crosses that line between wild ground and human floor without hesitation. Each time she ignores the hands, the soft gasps, the way people press themselves flat against the wall to make space. She isn't asking them what to do. She is doing it. If you've ever sat by a hospital bed and watched someone you love disappear one breath at a time, you know the way emotions can pile up in your chest. Love, fear, helpless anger. A strange kind of loyalty that keeps you there, even when you'd rather run. You know what it feels like to search the room for something. Anything that says this moment matters. In this little desert clinic, the thing that answers that longing is a bobcat. To most of us, bobcats are shadows at the edge of the property line. We may catch a tail on a trail camera, hear a story from a neighbor about a big cat out by the wash. They belong to the realm of almost fairy tales. Mysterious, untouchable. The kind of wildness that doesn't look back when it walks away. But Sable is not in the shadows now. She's on the bed of a dying woman, stretching out along Mara's legs, the kittens huddled by the crook of a motionless knee. Her body curls protectively, muscles relaxed but alert. She starts to purr, a deep, rolling thunder that vibrates through the mattress, through the metal frame, through the thin air in Mara's tired lungs. In the corner, The monitor traces a slow, uneven line. The room holds its breath. You can almost feel the staff thinking the same thing. She came to us because we fix things. She must be asking us to fix this too. It's a comforting idea. It turns this into one of those inspirational stories where human knowledge swoops in at the last second, where the animal's faith is rewarded with a happy twist. And yet, under that, something else is stirring. Because if you look closely at Sable's face, not for long, not to humanize her too much, just enough to honor what's in front of you. You see, this doesn't look like a plea. It looks like a presentation, a quiet, stubborn act that says, "These are mine. I am placing them here." This isn't the kind of moral story where an animal becomes a cartoon hero. It's something stranger, more grounded. A wild mother, breaking every instinct she was born with, carrying her babies into the most human place on the property, not away from danger, but straight toward it. The kindness in the room isn't loud. It's in the way Gloria checks Mara's oxygen without blocking Sable's view. It's in the way a volunteer stifles a sob so he won't startle the kittens. It's in the way no one reaches to pull Sable off the bed, even though every training manual says a predator doesn't belong this close to fragile human skin. There's love here too, but it's not the easy storybook kind. It's layered. Years of work, of choices, of little moments that brought this wild cat and this tired woman to the same narrow piece of mattress at the same hour of the same day. From the outside, you might call this a heartwarming story and move on. From inside the room, it feels different. It feels like something old and quiet has just stepped over a boundary we didn't know was there. We'll talk about why. We'll go back and see who Mara is. What kind of life leads to a wild animal resting on your legs as you lie under hospital blankets? We'll walk out to the refuge and meet the younger Sable, before the scars, before the kittens. We'll see how this unlikely moment was stitched together by hundreds of small choices, acts of loyalty, threads of trust you could barely see at the time. For now, just hold this image. A clinic in the desert, an elderly woman, and a bobcat who refused to let her face the end alone. If scenes like this touch something in you, if they remind you of a pet who once lay their head on your chest, or a day when the world felt a little more gentle than you expected, you're welcome to stay. Take a breath. Settle in. In the next part, we'll step outside this quiet room and into the dry, bright air of High Mesa to understand how a life spent with wild creatures led Mara Ellison here, to this bed, to this cat, and to 3 small kittens blinking in the light. When you stand out there in the early light, before the heat climbs up off the sand, High Mesa Wildlife Refuge doesn't look like much. A gravel drive, a few low buildings, some fencing stitched across the hillside. If you didn't know better, you might drive past and never guess how many wild hearts have crossed this ground. But this unassuming patch of desert is where Mara Ellison poured almost every year of her adult life. High Mesa sits where the flatland finally gives up and lets the hills rise. Pinon and juniper dot the ridges. In winter, frost dusts the fence posts. In summer, the air shimmers above the dirt road. Bobcats move through these canyons like whispers. Coyotes leave their prints on the same trails that volunteers walk before sunrise with buckets of feed. Mara always said this place wasn't about saving every animal. It was about saying yes to the ones in front of her. If you could rewind a few years from that hospital bed, you'd find her most mornings on the porch of the little office, her chipped blue mug in one hand, watching the sky lighten over the enclosures. No fanfare. No staff meeting, just a quiet mental list. Who needs medicine? Who's due for release? Which fence line has been nagging at the back of her mind? The first real turning point came decades earlier, with a red-tailed hawk. Back then, High Mesa was barely more than a rented trailer and a couple of makeshift pens. A rancher brought in the hawk, wrapped in his denim jacket, wings hanging wrong. Mara had no money for extra tests, no staff to call in, just a beat-up vet truck and a willingness to sit up all night. Weeks later, on an evening painted in those impossible Arizona oranges and purples, She carried that hawk in a crate up a low hill behind the property. There was no audience, just crickets, the crunch of her boots, the smell of dust cooling. She opened the crate and waited. The hawk hesitated for a full minute, mantle feathers fluffed. Then, without a backward look, it stepped to the edge and exploded into the air. Mara's hands shook. Her chest felt like someone had opened a door inside it. She walked back down the hill alone, but not lonely. That simple moment, one wild creature lifted back into its own life, turned this refuge from a good idea into a vow. Of course, they weren't all like that. Years later, a young raccoon came in after a car strike. The damage was worse than any of them realized. Mara and the vet worked for hours in the tiny clinic room, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the smell of antiseptic mixing with the damp fur smell that clings to everything in places like this. There was a moment when it seemed the little body might rally. Then the breathing changed. They did what they could. It wasn't enough. Afterward, when the forms were filled out and the table wiped down, Mara slipped out the back door and sat on the concrete step. She didn't cry. She just stared into the dark, hands empty for once, listening to the coyotes calling out in the distance. The loss sat heavier than it should have, for one small animal among so many. If you've ever worked in a hospital or a shelter, or even just loved an aging dog, you know that feeling. Love and loyalty don't guarantee a happy ending. Sometimes all they give you is the courage to stay near when the ending isn't what you hoped. High Mesa had those nights too. There was a winter when the feed bills and vet invoices stacked so high on Mara's desk that they started to tilt. The truck needed tires. The well pump was coughing. Donations had dried up after a rough year in town. She ran the numbers 3 times and came to the same place. They were one bad month away from shutting the gates for good. One cold morning, she stood in the middle of the main path, hands hooked in her pockets, and really imagined it. No more rehabbed owls in the flight cage. No more foxes slinking through the dusk near the back fence. No more bobcat eyes watching from the shadows. She almost made the call. Instead, she walked the pens one more time. A one-eyed coyote limped up to sniff her boots. A raven in the corner aviary clicked its beak and fluffed its feathers. Out beyond the perimeter, a wild bobcat moved along a ridge, a brief shape against the rising sun. That afternoon, a letter arrived from a woman in another state. Inside was a short note about how Mara's work had helped her through a hard season, and a check that covered exactly what was needed to get through the winter. Just enough, just in time. Mara kept that letter in a file marked simply proof. High Mesa became that kind of place. Not dramatic, not glamorous, just a steady, quiet corner where kindness got to be practical, where love showed up as scraped knuckles, early alarms, and the patience to sit for hours with a frightened animal until its breathing slowed. It wasn't just healing for the animals. A retired mechanic started coming out on Fridays to fix gates and water lines. He said it gave him something to care about that didn't live in his past. A woman who'd lost her sister spent her Saturdays raking paths and refilling bird baths, saying very little, but standing for long minutes watching the bobcat enclosure. If you've ever walked into a place and felt your shoulders drop, like you just exhaled for the first time in days, you know what High Mesa was for people like that. A refuge is more than pens and permits. It's a kind of promise that says, even in a noisy world, there are still pockets of soulful attention. Here, moral stories weren't written out on signs. They lived in routine moments. The way a volunteer learned to respect the space a wild fox needed. The way a staff member chose to speak softly even when rushed. Little acts of kindness that would never go viral, but mattered deeply to the living beings right in front of them. And somewhere in the middle of all this, the hawks, the raccoons, the paperwork, the almost closures, and the near miracles, a young bobcat came into Mara's life. At first, she was just another intake on a long list. Injured leg, underweight, found by the highway. The kind of case High Mesa saw more often as the town spread its lights farther into the dark. No one standing in that cramped intake room could have guessed that this one small, furious cat would carry her kittens into a clinic years later. or that she would be at the center of an inspirational story people would share around kitchen tables and late-night screens, the way we share modern fairy tales that are actually true. If you've stayed with me this far, it's probably because something about this rhythm, wild creature, human hands, shared space, speaks to you. Maybe you've wondered what it would be like to stand at a fence and feel golden eyes on you. Maybe you've wished, quietly, for proof that heartwarming stories still unfold in out-of-the-way places. They do. In the next part, we'll step closer to that bobcat, the one who will one day climb onto Mara's hospital bed. We'll see how she arrived here as a terrified kitten, and how, over 8 long years, fear slowly gave way to a bond that no one, not even the staff, fully understood. If you'd like to keep walking this path with us, through dust and dawn, and the soft sound of paws on sand, just stay right where you are. The story is about to turn toward Sable, and the journey that led her from the side of a road to the edge of a hospital blanket. If you saw her on that very first day, you might not recognize the bobcat who would one day climb onto Mara's bed. She was the size of a large house cat, all ribs and fury, crouched in the back of a crate that smelled like gasoline and highway dust. A state trooper had found her near a culvert on Route 191, back leg twisted at an angle that made even the vet wince. No mother, no siblings, just a wild child of the desert left on the shoulder of a busy road. This is where Sable's 8-year journey with Mara begins. Not with a magical moment or a perfect connection, but with a broken limb and a room full of noise. The intake exam is all business: sedation, x-rays, a quiet conversation over a light box about whether the leg can be saved. The vet explains that bobcats need all 4 legs working well to hunt in the wild. Even with surgery, this one will never run or pounce the way she was meant to. Mara listens, jaw tight. She's heard this verdict before with other animals. "So she stays," she says finally. "If she makes it through, High Mesa is home." The surgery is long. The night that follows is longer. Mara drags an old folding chair into the quarantine room next to the temporary enclosure they've set up. Tubes, bandages, the soft beep of a monitor borrowed from the clinic. Outside, a warm wind pushes dust against the windows. Inside, the air smells like antiseptic and damp fur. Every time thunder rolls across the hills, the little bobcat startles, muscles twitching under sedation. The storm builds fast, as they do in the high desert. Sudden sheets of rain slapping the roof, lightning cracking so close it rattles the metal cabinets. Most people would close the door and let the machines do the watching. Mara doesn't. She slips a poncho over her shoulders and takes a chair out under the overhang, right next to the enclosure wall. She can't go in. Quarantine protocols won't allow it, but she can be near. She hums an old tune, some half-remembered melody from her childhood, low and steady under the thunder. It isn't flashy. It doesn't fix anything. But that long, wet night is the first thread in something we might call loyalty, if we're careful with the word. Weeks turn into months. The leg heals, but not perfectly. Sable. The name comes later, when her coat darkens along the spine, learns to move with a slight hitch in her step, favoring the repaired limb. She can climb, and she can sprint in short bursts, but the wild range she was born for is now a fenced hillside with platforms and rocks. This is where the real work of trust begins. One morning, while Mara is sliding a dish of meat into the feeding slot, Sable lunges faster than usual. It's not malice, just fear mixed with hunger, but her claws catch Mara's forearm. The world narrows to a swipe, a sting, the sudden hot line of blood. A younger rehabber might react, yank back, shout, snap at the cat for being ungrateful. Mara does something else. She freezes, hand still, eyes soft. "All right," she murmurs, voice even. "You got scared. So did I." She eases the dish the rest of the way in, then steps back slowly, letting the gate close with a calm click. Later, in the clinic, Gloria cleans the wound and says, "You know, most folks would take that personally." Mara smiles with one corner of her mouth.
Fear makes sharp choices, she says. I've made mine. So has she.
It's a small exchange, but it holds the kind of kindness our older viewers know well. The choice to understand instead of punish. The way you might respond to a frightened partner or an aging parent lashing out from pain. Months pass. Sable grows into her adult coat, spots and stripes settling into a pattern only she will ever wear. She learns the dimensions of her world. The tall post that means look out. The patch of shade that stays cool even in August. The low stump where Mara likes to stand and talk to her. One cold morning, Mara drops a glove inside the enclosure by accident. It lands halfway between the gate and the water pan. Regulations say she can't step in with Sable, not even for a second. Not with those claws and that wild heart. She tells herself she'll bring the catchpole later, retrieve it properly. The day gets busy. A fox intake, a call from the county, a donor visit. Evening falls. On her last round, Mara walks past Sable's enclosure and stops short. The glove is lying right in front of the gate. Not chewed, not shredded, just placed there, like someone set it down on purpose. Sable sits a few feet away, watching, tail tip twitching. Now, anyone who's worked with wild animals will tell you, be careful not to turn everything into a sign. We humans love fairy tales and heartwarming stories, and it's easy to project love where there's really just curiosity. But this is how moral stories sometimes begin in real life. Not with miracles, but with tiny, repeatable moments that don't quite fit our old assumptions. Mara doesn't tell anyone that night. She just picks up the glove, turning it over in her hands, and says quietly, "Thank you." Whether Sable understands the words or not, she holds her ground, eyes steady. There are other moments like that over the years. A blistering July afternoon when a dust devil rips through the compound, sending grit and leaves swirling. While the smaller animals panic, Sable presses herself against the far fence, where she can see Mara, as if anchoring herself to that familiar figure. A winter dawn when a volunteer stands too close to the enclosure, shoulders hunched from grief after losing a spouse. And Sable chuffs. A short, breathy sound, and sits down in clear view, letting herself be seen, offering a presence that needs nothing in return. And the first time she purrs. It isn't cute or dainty. It's a deep, steady vibration you feel through your boots before you realize you're hearing it. Mara is leaning against the fence post, talking in that low, ordinary voice about the day's repairs and the new fox that came in with a snare wound. Her sentences drift in the cold air, unremarkable. Then the sound starts. A rolling, engine-like hum from Sable's chest. Mara goes quiet. She doesn't move closer. She just stays, hand resting on the wood, eyes a little brighter than the wind alone can explain. If you've ever had a dog press its weight against your leg on a hard day, or a cat curl up on your chest right when you needed it most, you know that feeling. It isn't magic. It isn't proof of anything beyond the moment itself. But it touches something soulful, the part of us that still believes in connection, that doesn't need words. Over 8 years, these small, practical, unspectacular moments stack up. A dish of food was delivered gently, a gate latched with care, a human voice repeating the same phrases day after day. A bobcat learning that this one person is part of the landscape, not a threat. By the time we reach the night when Sable will vanish into the storm, this bond is not a viral video. It's a long, quiet, inspirational story, written in daily choices. And that's important, because when we jump straight to the hospital scene, the kittens on the blanket, the wildcat on the bed, it can feel too big, too neat. But when you see the path that led there, every scratch, every storm, every returned glove, it stops being unbelievable and starts being something else. The natural result of two lives that kept showing up for each other. If Sable's journey reminds you of a bond you've had with a pet, a place, or even a person you didn't expect to care for, you're not alone. These are the quiet, heartwarming stories we rarely put into words, but they shape us more than we think. In the next part, we're going to shift our focus to someone who's been standing just off to the side of these scenes. Claire. We'll see how a burned-out nurse, carrying her own private losses, slowly becomes the human who will have to carry Mara's legacy and Sable's trust into a future she never planned for. If you'd like to keep walking that road with us, just stay right here. Take a breath. Let the image of that small, fierce kitten growing into a guardian settle in. The story is about to widen to include the people who will be asked to step up when the original caretaker can't. In some places, you can tell who they're really for by watching who walks through the gate. In the case of High Mesa, it isn't just the injured hawks or the limping bobcat who need help. It's the people who arrive looking like they've forgotten how to breathe all the way down. Claire Donovan was one of those. She showed up on a late spring morning with a duffel bag in the back of her car and a volunteer form printed off the internet. Former ER nurse from Phoenix. Just looking to help with the animals, she said. Mara took one look at the way her shoulders sat just a little too high, the way her eyes scanned every corner of the clinic like she was still on shift, and knew that wasn't the whole story. But at High Mesa, they didn't demand full histories. They put a rake in your hands, showed you where the hoses were, and let you set your own pace. For the first few weeks, Claire did what all new volunteers do. She scrubbed water troughs until her back ached. She hauled bags of feed, learning by trial and error how to keep her footing on the loose gravel. She listened to the usual orientation talk about not touching the wildlife, about keeping movements slow, about respecting the fact that every creature here still belonged more to the hills than to the humans. But the shift started to happen the first time Mara took her to Sable's enclosure. "Think you're ready to help with the cat?" Mara asked, not unkindly. Claire hesitated. The word cat made her think of the pets she'd grown up with, curled on couches, purring against ankles. The creature in front of her was something else. Sable watched from the back of her space, pupils thin in the afternoon light, body coiled but calm. Mara showed Claire how to work the double gate, how to slide the dish of meat through the feeding slot without putting fingers anywhere they didn't belong. It was a simple task, mechanical. Even so, Claire's hands shook. It wasn't really about Sable. In her body, there was still the memory of monitors screaming in emergency rooms, of trying to feed someone who couldn't swallow, of doing everything right and watching the numbers fall anyway. Her muscles remembered running toward crisis, not toward a fence line with a steady animal waiting on the other side. She forced herself to slide the dish through, pull her hand back, and lock the latch. Sable stepped forward, sniffed, and began to eat. No drama, no lunging, just a wild animal taking what was offered. For a second, Claire realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a slow stream. Mara, watching from the side, pretended not to notice the small sheen in her eyes. Later that week, on a windy afternoon, Claire made her first real mistake. She'd been helping in the fox pens, then the aviary, mind half on a memory she didn't want. An older woman in a hospital bed, fingers reaching for hers as the monitors picked up speed. The kind of moment that leaves a bruise inside you. You can't see. By the time she reached Sable's enclosure, she was tired and distracted. She fed, she closed, she thought she'd latched. She hadn't. Mara found it on her evening round. The gate was technically closed, but not fully sealed. Sable was dozing on a high platform, completely unaware of her near chance at freedom, or danger, depending on how you look at it. Mara fixed the latch, then went looking for Claire. "I could have," Claire started when she saw the expression on Mara's face. Anger she could have handled. Lecture she deserved. Instead, Mara said, "You could have made a mistake. You did. And we caught it today. That's what matters." "I should have been more careful." Mara nodded. "Yes. And your next shift you will be. That's how this works." She paused, voice softening. "You think I haven't missed a latch in 30 years? It was such a simple exchange, but something was healing in it. A kind of kindness Claire wasn't used to anymore. Not the fluffy kind, but the steady sort that says, "You're still worth trusting, even after you slip." If you've ever carried a mistake around like a stone in your pocket, you know how heavy that can feel, especially if that mistake had to do with someone else's body, someone else's last hour. Claire had those stones, more than she let on. At night, back in the small trailer the refuge kept for out-of-town volunteers, she would sit on the narrow bed and scroll past heartwarming stories on her phone. Dogs reunited with families, soldiers coming home, strangers paying each other's grocery bills. She believed those stories, mostly, but they sometimes felt like they belonged to a softer world than the one she'd walked away from. High Mesa began to show her a different kind of story. On Thursdays, a retired mechanic came to fix fences. He didn't talk much, but the way he patted the side of the old feed truck when it finally turned over said a lot. On Saturdays, a woman who had lost her sister to cancer cleaned the pathways in front of the enclosures, moving slowly, pausing often to look at Sable the way someone might look at a photograph they're not ready to put away. None of them wore capes. No one here was doing grand gestures. They were just showing up, again and again, for creatures who didn't know their names. It was a quieter kind of inspirational story, one built out of repetition, not miracles. One evening, Mara invited Claire to a town meeting about the refuge. A few ranchers voiced worries about predators. A local official asked pointed questions about funding, liability, and the usual list. Mara answered calmly, talking about bobcats and coyotes, about how they navigate fence lines and backyards, about how High Mesa worked with ranchers to reduce trouble instead of pretending conflict didn't exist. Claire watched from the back of the room as Mara stood there, oxygen tank tucked against her leg, speaking for animals who'd never know how much she'd fought for them. It struck her that this was its own kind of nursing, just with claws and feathers instead of chart numbers. On the drive back, the desert was dark around them, the truck headlights catching stray bits of tumbleweed. "I used to think I could handle anything," Claire admitted, eyes on the road. "In the ER. Then there was this one patient. She didn't have family. I stayed late, even off the clock. And when she died, it felt like something tore loose inside me. I kept going for a while, then one day I just didn't." Mara didn't offer a pep talk. She didn't tell Claire that everything happens for a reason or that time heals all wounds. She simply said, "Sometimes the work burns us. Sometimes it saves us. Sometimes it does both. And we don't know which is which until years later." If you're listening to this while you do dishes or sit in a quiet house at the end of a long day, you might recognize yourself in that. Maybe you were the one who stayed late at a hospital, or who sat by a hospice bed, or who nursed a pet through their last months. Maybe you're still not sure which parts of that broke you and which parts made you more yourself. High Mesa didn't ask Claire to pick. It just gave her a place to put her hands to use again. And Sable, in her own way, met her there. The bobcat, who'd once been all teeth and terror, now pressed her face to the fence when Claire walked by, letting out that low purr that seemed to vibrate straight through rib cages. It wasn't exactly love. That word can be tricky when we talk about wild animals. But it was something close to loyalty, built on consistency and respect. Over time, people around the refuge started to notice that when Mara couldn't make it to the enclosures, Sable's eyes followed Claire instead. Habits shifted, feeding schedules adjusted. Without anyone officially naming it, a baton was slowly passing. That's the way real moral stories often unfold, not with trumpets, but with subtle changes in who an animal looks for, whose footsteps they recognize in the gravel, whose voice they relax to. In our next part, that slow shift is going to matter, because soon, Mara's breath will become work. The oxygen tank that rode in the truck to town meetings will follow her into the clinic. And while the refuge grapples with what it means to care for a human whose body is failing, Sable will be making her own hard choices on the other side of the fence. If Claire's quiet healing at High Mesa touches something in you, if you've ever wondered where to place your own tired hands after a season of too much loss, you're welcome to stay with this story. We're about to step into the hardest chapter: illness, risk, and the storm that will push both woman and Bobcat to the edge of what their bond can bear. By the time you notice it, it's already been happening for a while. One morning, Mara pushes open the office door like she's done 1,000 times before and has to stop halfway across the porch, hand braced on the frame, chest lifting a little too high for the distance she's walked. The air that once felt like a friend now feels thick, reluctant to go all the way down. That's the quiet moment when breath becomes work. Pulmonary fibrosis. Gloria says the words gently in the clinic, tracing a fingertip over the diagram in a dog-eared booklet. Scar tissue in the lungs, less room for air. Your body is trying, she tells Mara. It's just got less space to do it in. The machine in the corner hums as she speaks, a portable concentrator pulling oxygen from the same desert air that made High Mesa feel like freedom for so long. A clear tube loops over Mara's ears and under her nose. It's not dramatic, just another piece of equipment in a life already full of them. But for Mara, it changes the shape of her days. She tries at first to pretend nothing's different. The tanks ride in the feed truck, clanking softly as she bumps down the road. She insists on doing her full round. The aviaries, the fox pens, the injured coyote out back. By the time she reaches Sable's enclosure, her hand shakes just a little as she slides the dish into the feeding slot. Sable notices. The bobcat's eyes flick from the food to Mara's face. She steps forward, but slower than usual. There's no lunge, no impatient swat. She takes the meat and then lingers. Stays near the fence, head tilted, watching the rise and fall of Mara's shoulders as if the rhythm has changed. And it has. Gloria, watching from the path, murmurs to Claire, "She's charting, in her own way." In the following weeks, those small pauses turn into patterns. The walk from the bunkhouse to the enclosures stretches longer. Mara stops twice, then 3 times. Oxygen becomes not just a backup, but a constant companion. On the days when wind kicks up dust, she stays inside the clinic, window cracked, watching the compound through glass instead of from the gravel. She hates it. If you've ever had your body slow down while your mind still wants to move at full speed, you know that mix of frustration and grief. The stairs you used to take 2 at a time become a measured climb. The yard you used to mow in an afternoon suddenly takes a weekend. For a woman who built her life on movement, hauling crates, lifting raptors, chasing down half-wild goats, that loss cuts deep. One evening, Claire finds Mara sitting on the edge of the exam table, oxygen tubing hissing softly, staring at the intake whiteboard. "Gloria wants you to rest," Claire reminds her. Mara's eyes stay on the list of animals and dates. "Rest feels like quitting with a polite name," she says quietly. Claire leans against the counter. "Rest is what lets other people step in. You've been carrying this place for a long time." Mara doesn't answer right away. Her gaze drifts to the clinic window where Sable's enclosure is just visible as a darker shape against the fading light. "Did I do right by her?" she asks, finally. "Keeping her? Keeping her here?" It's not the first time she's voiced this, but now, with the hiss of oxygen and the ache in her chest, the question takes on new weight. She talks about an offer she had years back from a larger sanctuary in another state. More land, more funding. They had space for a non-releasable bobcat. "I almost sent her," Mara admits. "Thought maybe she'd be happier, whatever that means, with more ground under her." "What stopped you?" Claire asks. Mara's fingers tap the side of the bed, a slow, thoughtful rhythm. "I was scared the transport would break her. Scared she'd wind up alone in a bigger box with strangers who'd never sat outside her enclosure during a monsoon." She shrugs, the movement small under the tubing. "I told myself I was choosing for her. Some days, I wonder if I was choosing for me." If you've ever had to decide whether to move a parent into care or when to stop a treatment for a beloved animal, you know that ethical tangle. We tell ourselves we're doing what's best. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's mixed with our own fear of loss, our own need to keep them where we can still touch them. High Mesa doesn't offer an easy answer. It just holds space for the question. Out by the enclosure, Sable's behavior shifts in ways the logs can't fully capture. She begins to refuse food from anyone else on the days Mara doesn't come. The dish goes untouched until Mara's voice floats across the yard, even if Claire is the one physically sliding it in. Her pacing increases, not frantic but restless, tracing the same stretch of fence where she used to watch Mara walk up from the bunkhouse. Now the path leads from the clinic. On good days, they wheel Mara's bed to the window of a small room that looks out over the compound. She lies propped on pillows, oxygen line curling like a plastic vine, and watches the familiar patterns play out in miniature. Volunteers moving along the paths, a raven landing on a post, Sable appearing as a tawny shape against the rocks. Sometimes Sable stops and stares straight toward the glass, as if she can feel eyes on her. Her tail flicks once, twice. A low purr starts up, audible only if you're close to the fence.
Feels like she's doing bedside checks of her own,
Gloria says one afternoon, adjusting Mara's cannula. There's a half smile in her voice, but her eyes are serious. She's seen detached passings, lonely ones, noisy ones. This one is different. There is a wild animal outside the window that has not lost interest in the patient. Mara's inner world grows quieter, but it doesn't go blank. In the small hours, when the clinic is dim and the only light comes from the machines, she murmurs into the darkness. Not full prayers, not anything scripted.
Just breathe, thanks. For the hawk,
she whispers one night, remembering that first release.
for the stubborn raccoon, for the ones who made it, for the ones who didn't.
Her hand finds the edge of the blanket.
For the cat who won't look away.
It's not the language of doctrine, it's the language people use when they're talking to whoever might be listening, without needing to know exactly who that is. From a distance, their story might sound like one of those simple, heartwarming stories people share online. A dying woman, a loyal bobcat, a tidy circle of love and kindness. But up close, it's more complicated. And in that complexity, there's something deeply human. Mara has regrets. She worries about the animals she couldn't save, the grants she didn't write in time, the days she let frustration snap her tone. She wonders if Sable would have preferred a short, wild life over this long, curated one with limited horizon. And yet, when she sees Sable's shape at the fence, when she feels Claire's hand squeeze hers, when Gloria stands quietly in the doorway, not out of duty, but out of genuine loyalty, there is also a softness that wasn't there in her younger years, an understanding that sometimes the most soulful connections are born right inside our compromises. If you're listening and thinking of someone you've watched slow down, maybe a spouse, a sibling, a parent, you might feel that mixture too. Gratitude for the years you got, guilt for the moments you wish you'd handled differently, a quiet hope that when your own breath becomes work, there will still be eyes that don't look away. At High Mesa, the sky keeps changing above all of this. Clouds stack higher on the horizon. Late summer heat builds into something more charged. The radio crackles more often with weather updates. Staff secure tarps, check fences, and run their hands along posts looking for weak points. They know storms out here can turn a calm afternoon into chaos. Sable feels it too. She patrols her perimeter more intensely, nose testing the shifting air, ears twitching at distant rumbles. Soon, one of those storms will topple more than just branches. It will take down a section of fence and force both Sable and the refuge to face a question no one has prepared for. What happens when the wild heart you've cared for slips back into a world that may not be kind to her? In our next part, we'll step into that storm, the night Sable disappears, the search that follows, and the days she spends outside the fence with her kittens, navigating hunger, danger, and an instinct stronger than fear. If this chapter of Mara's illness and Sable's watchful presence stirs something in you, if it reminds you of the fragile threads between bodies, choices, and the creatures that stay near us, you're welcome to keep walking with this story. The sky is about to darken, and what happens in that storm will change everything that follows. The storm that took Sable didn't arrive with much warning. It rose up on the horizon the way desert storms often do. One moment, just a smudge of gray over the distant mesas. The next, a wall of cloud stacking itself higher and darker than seems reasonable. By late afternoon, the air at High Mesa felt tight, like the whole refuge was holding its breath. The radios crackled with weather alerts. Claire and the volunteers moved fast, securing tarps over smaller enclosures, checking latches, walking the perimeter with that particular urgency that comes when you've been through this before and know how quickly, probably fine, can turn into trouble. Inside the clinic, Mara watched it all through the window. Lightning stitched across the sky, throwing brief, harsh light over the Bobcat enclosure. For a few seconds at a time, Sable appeared in stark silhouette, pacing, then crouching low, then staring up at the clouds like she could read something there. Wind slammed into the buildings. The first drops of rain hit the roof like handfuls of gravel, then turned into a curtain. Dust became mud in minutes. The air smelled of wet creosote and electric fear. Fence line on the west side could be a problem, Gloria said, leaning over Mara to adjust her oxygen. That cottonwood's been complaining all year. Mara's eyes stayed on Sable's shape, blurred now by rain on the glass. She hates thunder, she murmured. Always has. If you've ever watched a storm roll in, knowing someone or something you love is out there in it, you understand that helpless feeling. The way your hands want to do more than they can, the way your mind races through all the what-ifs. Out in the yard, the storm found its weak spot. The old cottonwood, roots loosened by years of wind and just enough water, gave up with a cracking sigh that no one could hear over the thunder. It toppled sideways, its trunk smashing down on a stretch of fence along Sable's enclosure. In the chaotic minutes that followed, flashlights cutting through sheets of rain, volunteers shouting over the wind, gates being double-checked, no one saw exactly when Sable slipped through the gap. One moment she was a shadow behind the wire. Next, the storm had swallowed her. They didn't know she was gone until morning. The refuge always feels a little stunned after a night like that. Branches scattered, tarps peeled back, everything smelling freshly washed and a little unfamiliar. When Claire reached Sable's enclosure at first light, heart already thudding from climbing the slippery path, she stopped cold. Fence down, tree across the outer wall, and inside? Nothing. No tawny body on the usual platform. No golden eyes in the brush. The space felt empty in a way that went beyond sight, the way a room feels after someone has moved out and taken their presence with them. She keyed the radio with wet fingers. "West enclosure's compromised," she said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "Sable's not here." In the clinic, Mara's eyes snapped open. "She got out?" The words rasped against the oxygen. Her hand gripped the bed rail hard enough to blanch the knuckles. "With that leg, out there?" "We'll find her," Claire promised, because that's what you say when someone you care about is caught between hope and panic. "We've got trackers, drones, the whole thing." And they did. That day, and the ones that followed, High Mesa turned itself inside out searching for one missing Bobcat. Staff and volunteers combed arroyos and ridgelines, boots sucking at the mud. They called her name, even though they knew intellectually that wild animals don't answer like pets. Habit is powerful. So is love, in whatever form it takes. Now and then they'd catch a glimpse of a paw print in softened dirt, a round impression with clear toe marks, just the right size. But the next flash of sun would harden the ground again, erasing clues as fast as they appeared. The narrator in us wants these searches to end like fairy tales, with someone shouting, "Found her!" and a tidy reunion by sunset. Real stories often stretch longer, but we do know how bobcats behave in this landscape. We know that a mother with young will choose seclusion over convenience every time. Somewhere in those soaked hills, nestled in a dry pocket she'd claimed long before the storm, Sable had a den, and inside that den were her kittens. The weight they'd noticed on her frame in recent months, the hours she spent pressed into a corner of her enclosure, it wasn't laziness. It was a pregnancy. It was a wild mother preparing the only way she knew how. When the storm came, instinct would have kicked in harder than fear. We can imagine out of rising water, away from the sound of creaking branches, into whatever dry, sheltered spot she could find. Back, hunting with a damaged leg in a landscape scoured by rain is no small thing. Rabbits hole up, rodents hunker down. Prey is harder to find, especially when you're also guarding a den. Every trip out means leaving your babies alone. Every moment away is a calculation between hunger and safety. If you've ever watched someone you love do the math between their own needs and the needs of those depending on them, an exhausted parent, a caregiver stretching themselves thin, you have a sense of that tension. Back at the refuge, the search reports came back the same every night. No luck in the East Ravine, no heat signatures on thermal. Trap set, bait untouched. In the clinic, Mara's world shrank to the few feet between her bed and the window. The storm had taken more than her breath. It had taken the sense that she could still keep her promises. She stopped asking about every animal on the board and started asking only one question. Any sign of her? Each "not yet" landed heavier. Meals went untouched. Sleep came in snatches. Her guilt, already a familiar companion, settled in like something with weight and claws of its own. She depended on us, Mara said one evening, staring past the glass toward the dark hills. On me. I built a world where she couldn't truly fend for herself anymore. Then I let her out into a storm. Claire tried to answer, but some sentences are less about seeking reassurance and more about laying the truth on the table. There isn't always a happy spin. Sometimes, the most soulful thing we can do is sit beside someone in their doubt, not rush to fix it. For viewers who've lost a pet that slipped out a door and never returned, or who've watched a loved one fade without clear answers, that ache might feel familiar. No closure, just questions and the slow, reluctant work of letting go. On the third day, the sky finally cleared. The sun came back sharp and bright, throwing every rock and fence post into high relief. The refuge looked almost the way it had before, just a few new scars on the landscape, a few new lines on the faces of the people walking the paths. What they didn't know, as they checked traps and reset cameras, was that out beyond the boundary, Sable had made a decision that went against every line in the field guides. We tend to imagine wild and tame as two separate worlds, animals over here, people over there. But Sable's time at High Mesa had threaded a different kind of loyalty through her wild instincts. She had a den now, and kittens. She also had a history with a human whose breathing she knew by sound. Soon, those two truths would collide. In the next part of this story, we'll be back in that clinic hallway, when the radio crackles with a voice, almost too stunned to form the words. She's at the back door. We'll walk with Claire as she chooses between protocol and compassion, and we'll step into the room where Sable brings the hidden truth of these missing days and lays it, trembling and alive, on Mara's blanket. If this storm chapter stirred any old memories in you, of waiting for news, of searching and not finding, of loving something you couldn't completely protect, you're welcome to stay with us. Take a slow breath. The weather has broken, but what happens next will shake every assumption we've held about what a wild bobcat can do in the name of love and kindness. By the time the sky cleared, most folks at High Mesa had quietly decided Sable was gone. Not because they didn't care, just because you can only wake up so many mornings to the words, "no sign," before your heart starts to protect itself. On the fourth evening after the storm, the clinic was quiet, in that particular way it gets near sunset. The shift change had passed. The radios had gone mostly still. In Mara's room, the blinds were tilted open just enough to let in a band of gold that lay across the foot of her bed like a warm hand. Claire sat in a chair by the window, reading out loud from an old field journal Mara had kept. Short entries about releases, weather, odd animal behavior. Mara's eyes were closed, but now and then her fingers twitched, like something in her was still listening. The oxygen hissed. The monitor ticked off a rhythm that was slower now, more uneven. Then the radio on Claire's belt cracked in that abrupt way that makes your stomach drop before your mind catches up. "Clinic, this is the yard team." You need to come to the back door. Claire thumbed the button. What's wrong? A pause. When the voice came back, it had that stunned, far-away sound people get when they're seeing something their training did not prepare them for. She's here, the voice said. Sable. And she's brought something with her. For a second, Claire didn't move. Her eyes went to Mara, whose lashes fluttered at the sound of Sable's name. Go, Mara whispered, barely audible under the mask. See what she wants. Down the hall, the staff gathered at the rear entrance. The evening light pooled on the concrete step outside, turning the puddles into little mirrors. And there, framed in the open doorway, stood Sable. She was thinner than before, ribs faint under her coat. Mud had dried in clumps on her legs, burrs dotted her fur, but her stance was steady. Her eyes were clear, and in her mouth, held with such delicate precision that not a tooth broke skin, was a tiny bobcat kitten. For a moment, every human brain in that hallway reached for the same explanation. She's hurt them. She's bringing them for help. It fit with the heartwarming stories we like to tell. The wild animal seeking out human medicine, the desperate mother begging the vets to save her young. It would make sense in a way that feels tidy and comforting. Maybe they're sick, someone murmured. Or she's out of options, someone else said. She knows we feed her. Maybe she thinks we... The sentences trailed off, because Sable wasn't acting like a frantic animal asking for a miracle. She was acting like someone following a plan. Protocols say we can't, one of the texts started. Gloria cut in, eyes on Sable's. Protocols don't cover this, she said quietly. She looked at Claire. If we shut that door on her now, I don't think she'll come back. There was a beat where time seemed to hang. Claire thought of all the charts she'd watched flatline in anonymous hospital rooms. All the times she'd wished she could give a patient one last, gentle thing. She looked down the hall toward Mara's room, where the monitor was tracing out what might be the last chapter of a lifetime of kindness. I'll take responsibility, she said. Let her in. They cleared the hallway, leaving a path from the door straight to Mara's room. The catchpole stayed nearby, but out of sight, just in case. No one wanted to send the wrong message. Sable stepped over the threshold with no hesitation. Her paws were soundless on the linoleum. She moved past the exam rooms and shelves of supplies, past the posters about hand washing and rabies protocols, straight toward the one door at the far end of the corridor. Room 3. Mara's room. Inside, the light was softer. Machines glowed. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something older. Wool, dust, the ghost of sagebrush carried in on people's clothes. Sable crossed to the bed, muscles coiled but controlled. She lifted her head and set the kitten down on the blanket near Mara's knees with infinite care. The little body wobbled, tiny paws spreading, eyes still cloudy blue. It tried to burrow into the warmth in front of it. Mara's eyes open. For a heartbeat, she and Sable just looked at each other. The dying woman and the wildcat she'd once sat with through a storm. The machines hummed in the background like a distant choir. You came back, Mara breathed. Sable turned without a sound and trotted out of the room, past the stunned staff, back down the hallway. She's leaving? A volunteer whispered. Watch, Gloria said. Half a minute later, Sable reappeared. This time, dragging a battered cardboard box by the corner. She'd clearly been moving it in fits and starts, jaw clamped onto the softened edge. She paused in the doorway, nudged the box forward, and reached in. Another kitten, then a third. One by one, she carried them to the bed and placed them beside the first, building a small, living cluster of spotted fur on the blanket that had held so many human bodies over the years. The staff watched from the doorway, hands over mouths, tears already streaking faces that had seen plenty of loss. For a moment, no one spoke. No one wanted to break whatever thin, sacred thread was tying this all together. Up until now, it would be easy to see this as a plea for help. A mother in over her head, bringing her babies to the only hospital she knows. It's a compelling image. It fits the kind of inspirational story we like to share over coffee. But here's where the truth shifts. The narrator in us steps back and remembers what we know about bobcats. How fiercely mothers hide their young, how they tuck their dens into places almost impossible to find, how even in captivity they keep a distance, keeping their most vulnerable moments out of sight. For Sable to carry her kittens into the brightest, busiest, most human space on the property, to lay them not in front of a vet, but on the body of a dying woman, this isn't about medical intervention. It's about trust. A kind of trust, so deep it almost hurts to look at straight on. In that room, something passes that doesn't fit neatly into any category. It isn't domestic affection. It isn't pure instinct either. It's more like a bridge that's been slowly built over 8 years, finally being crossed all the way. Sable isn't just begging for help. She is doing something far stranger and more moving. She is presenting her children to the one human she has learned to see as safe, even as she seems to understand that human is about to leave. Mara reaches out with a hand that trembles. Sable watches, tense for half a second, then relaxes when the touch is gentle. The boldest kitten wobbles toward Mara's fingers, nuzzling the cool skin as if it's just another patch of sun-warmed rock. Gloria stands at the head of the bed, eyes on the monitor. Her practiced gaze notes the slowing heart rate, the lengthening space between breaths. She's seen many endings. This one feels less like a door slamming and more like a tide going out while new waves roll in.
If I wrote this in a chart,
She says softly later,
no one would believe me.
in your own life, you may have had moments that felt like this. Small on the outside, world-shifting on the inside. A dog that jumped onto the bed one last time with an effort you knew cost them everything. A person who squeezed your hand just once before they let go. Moments that don't translate easily into words, but linger for years. That's what this is for everyone in that room. And somewhere underneath the awe and the grief and the practical questions about what to do next with 3 newborn bobcats, another realization settles in. Whatever happens after this, the story of High Mesa is no longer just about rescuing animals. It's about what those animals give back in ways no one could have planned. In our final part, we're going to walk through the hours that follow. Mara's last quiet breaths, the rituals of grief at the refuge, and the 3 very different paths those kittens will take. We'll also talk about where stories like this leave us, not just with tears, but with a gentle invitation to live with a little more love, a little more kindness, and a deeper respect for the wild hearts around us. If this plea for help turned moment of shattering trust is still echoing inside you, stay close. Take one more slow breath. We're going to carry this story all the way through to the place where loss and hope meet, and see what it offers to your own life along the way. The room stayed full long after the machines went quiet. Not with noise, but with presence. Sable lay along Mara's legs, the 3 tiny bodies breathing in a jumble on the blanket, while the humans who had spent years keeping animals alive stood very still and watched one woman slip away. For a few minutes, no one moved. Even the monitor's flat line seemed like a respectful silence rather than a sound of failure. Gloria was the one who finally reached forward and turned it off. She'd ended more beeps than she could count, but later she would tell Claire, "I've never seen anyone leave with that much company." That night, High Mesa felt different. They didn't rush the Bobcat family out of the room. They dimmed the lights and let Sable stay until her purr faded back into ordinary breathing. When she finally hopped down from the bed, she did it without drama, lifting each kitten carefully into the cardboard box and dragging it back down the hallway. The staff stepped aside like a small honor guard, watching the little procession pass from clinic tile back toward the desert air. Grief doesn't stop for paperwork. There were forms to sign, a body to prepare, and phone calls to make. But when the practical things were done, the people who loved Mara did what people have always done when a steady light goes out. They gathered. In the small bunkhouse that had been Mara's home, Boots filled the doorway. Her mug was still on the counter, a ring of coffee dried in the bottom. Her old jacket hung on the hook by the door, smelling faintly of sagebrush and disinfectant. No one gave a speech. Someone put a kettle on. Someone else lit a candle and set it in the middle of the scarred kitchen table. Claire found Mara's field notebook and opened it to the last page she'd written on. 3 lines about a coyote release, a note to order more syringes, and a scribbled reminder to check west fence before next storm. It was such an ordinary list for a life that had just ended. They decided, quietly, how to mark her absence. Not with a statue or something grand, but with a living thing. The next morning, they planted a young juniper on the rise above Sable's enlarged enclosure. No plaque with a speech carved into it, just Mara's initials on a smooth stone at the base, where wind and paws could touch it. From the right angle, you could see the tree, the stone, and the Bobcat family, all in one line. That became their simple ritual. On hard days, someone would make the walk up there, hand on the rough trunk, eyes on Sable's territory below. If you've ever stood in a spot like that, a favorite porch, a grave under a big tree, a bench at the edge of a pond, you know how those places hold our emotions. They let us set down what we can't carry all the time. Time moved on the way it always does, whether we're ready or not. The kittens grew. At first, they were just 3 little question marks with paws. Then their personalities started to show. The bold male tested every branch in the enclosure, stalking imaginary prey in the tall grass, launching himself off logs with more enthusiasm than coordination. The cautious one preferred the edges, slipping from shade to shade, watching everything before joining in. The third, a slender female, was different still. She was the one who always seemed to be listening beyond the fence, ears pricked toward the distant ridges, nose lifted when the wind shifted. Staff started calling her Mesa, half joking that she was already dreaming of the wider world. Working with state biologists, High Mesa made a plan. When Mesa was old enough and had learned to hunt within a controlled setting, she would be released into a protected area miles away, collared and monitored as part of a conservation program. It was the closest they could come to honoring Mara's wish to keep them wild, while still respecting the reality that not every animal can simply be turned loose. The other 2 remained as permanent residents alongside Sable, ambassadors for a species most people only ever glimpse as a shadow at the end of a driveway. Visitors began to hear their story, not the cleaned-up fairy tales version, but the human one. A rehabber with scarred hands, a bobcat brought in broken, years of routine and loyalty, a storm, 3 kittens, a final bedside vigil that no one could explain in simple scientific terms. People came from town, from neighboring states, from across the country. Some stood at the fence and immediately reached for their phones to film. Others just rested their hands on the rail, watching Sable's family bask in the sun, something soft shifting in their faces. A man who had lost his wife last year came every Sunday. He never said much. He just watched the cats, and now and then wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. A retired teacher brought her sister and whispered, "Can you believe a wild bobcat did that?" Gloria, when she had time between shifts at the hospital, would join tours for a moment and say very quietly, "I've seen a lot of endings. I think love makes room for strange visitors." That's the thing about stories like this. On the surface, they're simple, heartwarming stories that we retell as feel-good content. A bobcat that shows unexpected kindness. A dying woman surrounded by love. A refugee living happily ever after. But under that, if we let ourselves sit with it, there's something more soulful happening. This isn't about turning wild animals into saints. Sable is still a predator. She still hisses when someone gets too close. The kittens still practice their pounces, claws flashing in the sun. The refuge still has to make hard choices. Which animals they can afford to take, when a life can be saved, and when comfort is the kindest option. The real weight of this inspirational story is in the way it bends our idea of where connection ends. It asks gentle questions. How far does kindness actually reach? What does it mean that a creature with every reason to distrust us chose, at the end of all things, to carry her babies into our care? And what might that say about the quiet contracts we make with our own animals, our own families, our own communities? You might be listening to this with a sink full of dishes in front of you, or a dog asleep at your feet, or a framed photo nearby of someone who isn't here anymore. Maybe you've lived moments of your own that don't quite fit into neat categories. Times when emotions caught you off guard, when a small action from a person or an animal felt bigger than anything happening on the news that day. Stories like Sable's and Mara's don't erase the hard parts of the world, but they do stand alongside them as quiet, moral stories. Reminders that love and loyalty are not limited to one species, one age, one kind of body. They are threads that keep showing up in hospital rooms, in desert sanctuaries, in living rooms where someone is grieving and still choosing to care for another living thing. What the kittens teach us, in the end, is simple and not simple at all. Life goes on, and it remembers. The bold one teaches us about courage that tumbles and gets back up. The cautious one shows us that watching from the edge can be its own kind of wisdom. Mesa, the wanderer, reminds us that some hearts are meant to roam, and that letting go can be an act of kindness too. And Sable, who once lay purring on a dying woman's legs, keeps walking the fence line, raising her young under the same sky where Mara once watched hawks rise. If this story has touched something in you, if it brought back the memory of a dog who waited by the door, a cat who knew when you were sick, or a person who stayed by your side when it would have been easier to leave, take a moment for yourself when this video ends. Maybe step outside and listen to the night sounds. Maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the living beings who have trusted you. And if you'd like to stay close to more true, gentle stories like this, more heartwarming stories of wild animals, second chances, and the strange ways love shows up between species, I'd be honored if you'd tap like, subscribe, and join us here again. Your presence helps these stories travel farther than this little refuge ever could. If you feel called to go one step further, your super thanks or donation, no matter the size, helps real rehabilitators feed, shelter, and heal wild animals like bobcats across the country. Together, in small, steady ways, we can keep making room for this kind of quiet magic in a world